This vulnerability allows an attacker to perform a local privilege escalation on newer Linux kernels. Hello world, I'm Zanidd and welcome to CVE Deep Dive. This vulnerability was found by an independent security researcher during the Typhoon Pwn 2022 event. Typhoon Pwn is a live hacking competition where hackers can win monetary prizes for found exploits. It is part of TyphoonCon, an all-offensive security conference held in South Korea every year with keynotes, trainings, CTFs and Typhoon Pwn. Now this vulnerability allows a local user to exploit a race condition to elevate their privilege to become root. In short, it works by letting a local user double free a pointer and controlling the outcome of the second free call. But more on it later. Let's take a look at the CVSS score first. Since this vulnerability already has a CVE assigned to it, we don't need to calculate the scores ourselves, but can use the existing one provided by Red Hat. The attack vector is local, the complexity and required privileges are both low, and it does not require any user interaction. The scope is unchanged since the attack attacks the system directly. And now let's take a look at how this vulnerability impacts the target. Since it's a privilege escalation exploit, the impact on confidentiality, integrity and availability is high. And this leads to a total base score of 7.8. This means it's a high severity rating for this vulnerability. But luckily, the Linux team has already put out a patch for it. So now let's dig into it. Here you can see the exploit in action. In a typical race condition exploit style, it tries the same thing a couple of times until it can trigger the unlink in the child process. After unlinking it, it can leak the message address and get the timer pointer. After that, a local privilege escalation payload is written into the mode pro part of the OS and exploited. The main issue here is a bug in the clock thread CPU time ID CPU timer component. It is used for measuring the amount of CPU time consumed by a thread and trigger a timer action after a user specified time interval. This is a feature that is useful if a program wants to do something after a specific amount of time in a specific thread. All the timers are stored in a doubly linked list in the struct POSIX CPU timers, and every time a timer interrupt is raised, it will check whether the thread has consumed enough time. Once the thread has reached enough time, it will be moved into a firing linked list. Then all the timers in the firing linked list will be used to trigger the corresponding events. This sounds nice and cool in theory, but there is one problem with the Linux implementation. When a thread creates such a timer and calls the method execve, Linux will try to clean up all the timers. However, it forgets the ones in the POSIX CPU timer struct we just talked before. So if an attacker arms the timer before execve, the kernel will free the timer mechanisms while maintaining a reference to it in the timer list. This will cause a use after free situation when firing the freed timer. The pointer is not cleared and the attacker can use the arrow to hack the program to pass arbitrary code. In this example of the exploit, we gain a privilege escalation with the code. Now, I don't want to dig too deep into the code. You can check it out in the link provided down below, as well as the full advisory for this exploit. I hope you enjoyed this episode of CVE Deep Dive. If so, leave a like and subscribe so you get notified when we release the next one.